This is all about let them be wrong about you energy because you have nothing to prove. And the moment that you really step into that realization and the identity of the woman or the man who understands that you have nothing to prove and that your perception, the perception other people have of you, it's got nothing to do with you. When we are under the veil or the trance of unworthiness that is residing in the open, undefined will center, you will find yourself operating from a very reactive space. And it's going to be a space where the mind is trying to keep you safe. So the mind is going to have picked up patterns where you feel that you need to explain yourself or over explain yourself or work really, really, really fucking hard to prove that you're just good enough, not exceptional, not even outstanding, but that you're just good enough for the approval of the person passing judgment on or observing your work. So this pattern really blew up for me when I was a teacher because we used to have a system of observation. And I've got 51 in my incarnation cross. 51 is all about the energy and the spirit of competition. But when you're in that low expression of that energy and you're not in your power, that competition is about proving oneself to the world rather than the internal radiance that comes from your own spirit of competition for yourself. So that level of excellence, on one hand, if it's coming from a wellspring of desire for your own creative mastery, that's a different energy. But when you're in that competition energy because you want to prove your value to somebody else who's judging you or passing judgment on you that has no business to do so, because you want approval, you want their validation, you want acceptance. That's when we're moving into the realms of the inauthentic self and the trauma. And so, how did this play out for me before I had the realization and shifted the identity from somebody who was seeking that, like, and crumbs, crumbs of praise, to somebody who realized I have like literally nothing to prove. Now, what happened before I got to that point was really dark. I was driven, type A, because not purely, and this is where I see the difference and the nuance, it wasn't purely because of a drive for excellence and wanting to be great, because that's a valuable thing to be. But it was also really driven by the desire, the need, and the want for that external recognition. There was it was dark because I would go excessively. I would work excessively. I would take stimulants to be more focused and to be a machine. And it wasn't driven purely by the desire for excellence and a self-empowered desire to be amazing at my craft, because I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We all want to be great at what we do, I imagine. But the dark side was that it was driven by a deep wound of unworthiness that resides in our open will center when we are not aware of that patterning that can be conditioned in that space. And so when you are finding yourself over explaining, trying to prove you're right, you got nothing to prove. You don't need to prove. And the moment I let go of that, the moment I realized, hang on a minute, this is actually draining my energy, was the moment that I freed up a whole heap of creative power within my soul and actually started to be very grounded and energetically hold a lot of power. You'll see it on social media. You'll see the people that are proving, and forcing, and there's an energy and a distortion. There's an incongruence there. And so the moment that you decide, I have nothing to prove, and you stop explaining. So somebody recently was getting really het up, and they wanted to say, hey, they wanted to prove something to me. And I was like, I don't care. Like, they were like, go and look it up on the internet. And I'm like, I don't care. If you're right, you're right. It means nothing to me to have to have this, what used to be perhaps a satisfaction of knowing I was right. I know deeply within. So I now choose not to expend energy proving. Another way this showed up, so we had workaholism, and I discovered that actually I no longer needed to be under the spell of this need to prove for this external validation. Suddenly, I was deeply empowered in the knowing that my work spoke for itself. So there's this idea that when you model and lead by example, and you just are, there's no need. There's no need to actually to jump through hoops, to uh, to be over seeking attention, because you naturally magnetize the attention that is that is that comes with a sense of personal power. And then the third thing that happened, and this is going to be true for so many of us, is that we may have, this is not the truth for me anymore. I'm talking from a place of embodied wisdom. I'm talking from a place of experience and learning and transformation. Sovereignty, actually, which is why I'm really excited about launching the Sovereign CEO, but that's another story. Uh, when you have experienced narcissistic relationships or emotionally abusive relationships based on the way that the majority of the world are raised in a society that hasn't really got a lot of emotional intelligence, and everyone's operating from their trauma and not taking responsibility for their own emotionality, and their own wounding ultimately, and how they interact with other people, and the impact of that defense, those defenses that we all have until we decide we're going to evolve. You can find yourself in circumstances, as I did, in relationships where that would mirror that level of that chink of insecurity that you had within. So you would attract people that loved your shine, and they wanted to undermine you and degrade you ultimately. Because for me, I see all of that as a form of empowerment, as a pathway to empowerment. So when you find yourself in situations that where you're compromising your own needs and you're self-abandoning in some way, it really is the call of your soul to rise into that deep, deep self-love and that deep ability to return non-love with love, but rise in your own self-empowerment and the own levels of love for yourself, which then radiates out. But what happened was I would end up in a pattern of relationships where, um, yeah, I would ultimately be undermined and degraded, and have people speak about me in a way that wasn't true, and say stories that were just completely false. And I would try and prove and and it would rack my mind would be like, I need, like there was this compulsion. I have to speak out, have to be heard. And the more you try, the more you're not. The more that, like, so what you realize is, I don't need to prove the truth. And if I'm around people that cannot see the reality or the truth of who I am, they are not your people. So the realizations were, let me release what is not for me. Oh, my soul is like, ooh, because that's all it is. So the things that transformed my life was, how other people think about me is not my problem. And that is like nuanced. I don't dress things up anymore. I do not seek approval or validation. I choose to be very straight and transparent and honest in my communication with people. But ultimately, and I think another thing that really transformed and liberated me as well was I'm responsible for my emotions. So how what I'm feeling about a situation or an experience or an interaction really is my responsibility. And so I stopped taking on responsibility for other people's emotions and other people's experiences. Now, when you're operating from integrity and you are clean and you're very deep in your own self introspection and self inquiry, you can reflect and have clean, emotional, intelligent conversations. But if somebody's not ready for that, then you're not really gonna get anywhere. But that's kind of a sideline to this video where really it's about recognizing that in that open will or undefined will center, this is a center that is really holding self worth or lack of it, your sense of worthiness or lack of it, your sense of a healthy ego or wounding patterns of an unhealthy ego. And so the more that you can step into your neutral observer in a place of witness, and the more that you can actually operate from response and not reaction, not automatically trying to prove, actually stepping back and saying, there is nothing to prove, and make that your mantra, your life will change.